The photograph had been tucked away for years, its edges softened by time. In it, Amina sat on a park bench, hands folded in her lap, the smile practiced and small. Beside her, a man in a suit looked away, jaw set like a hinge. On the back, in a hand that had once been tender, someone had written, "For new beginnings." The photograph lived in a small box in the attic, under winter scarves and a pair of shoes that had never fit quite right. When her husband left, he left with a sentence that sounded like a verdict. "I can't wait for a life that might never come," he said, and he meant children. He packed a suitcase and a future and walked out of the house as if he were closing a door on a room he had never liked. Amina learned to answer the phone without expecting his voice. She learned to sleep with the absence like a physical thing. Years later, she returned to the town where she had grown up. Not because she wanted to, but because the mortgage demanded it and because the house had a way of keeping its history in small things. She came back with 2 small bundles in her arms. Identical twins, their faces the same as if one had been copied and pasted. They were quiet babies, with eyes that watched the world like small, patient animals. People on the street said, "She came back with mirrors," and meant it as both wonder and warning. Noor found her on the second day. Noor had been a classmate once, a woman with coin-colored eyes and a steady hand. She ran the community center and had a way of making people feel seen. She took the twins and hummed a lullaby Amina had not heard since childhood. "You are brave to come back," Noor said. "The town needs people like you." Noor introduced Amina to a small group that met in the basement of the community center. They called themselves the Covenant. They were not loud or flashy. They were precise. They met by candlelight, sat in a circle, and wore carved wooden masks during certain parts of the meeting. Each mask was different. Some smooth and polished, others cracked and darkened with age. Initials and small symbols were carved into the brow of each mask, small and deliberate. At the first meeting, Amina sat at the back with the twins in her lap. The room smelled of lemon oil and beeswax. A man with a voice like gravel stood and spoke of balance and reciprocity. He was called Idris. He spoke of service and of a practice they called dedication, a public ceremony where new members or their children were welcomed into the Covenant's care. He spoke of hymns, and when the group sang the hymns, the words were not quite words. They were phrases repeated and rearranged, syllables that slid into one another like a code. Amina listened and felt a prickle at the base of her skull. The Covenant's rituals were domestic. A shared meal, a candle lit at dusk, favors exchanged. But there was a precision to their language that felt like a mechanism. Noor handed Amina a small packet before she left. A folded hymn sheet, the ink faint, the notation odd. On the front someone had written, in a hand Amina did not recognize, "They sing what we forget." That night, after the twins were asleep and the house had settled into its old bones, Amina unfolded the hymn sheet. The lines were simple, almost nursery-like, but there were marks between the words, dots and slashes, a rhythm that suggested instruction. She read the lines aloud and felt the syllables fall into a pattern. She could not say why, but the sheet made her uneasy. The twins slept in unison. When one stirred, the other would stir at the same moment, as if a single pulse moved through them. Amina watched them and felt a tenderness that was also a kind of fear. She had been abandoned once. She would not let that happen again. A week later, she volunteered at the center, folding flyers and sweeping the basement. She learned the cadence of the Covenant by watching. The way members arrived early to light candles, the way they exchanged small favors, the way they kept their masks in a locked cabinet. She learned the names of the people who came and went: Noor, Idris, Salma, Rafi. They were polite, soft-spoken, and their eyes were steady in a way that made Amina feel both seen and exposed. On a rainy afternoon, she found a mask in the storeroom. It had been tucked behind hymnals, wrapped in a cloth. The wood was dark and cracked, initials carved into the brow. She recognized the hand that had carved the initials, the same small, deliberate strokes she had seen on the hymn sheet. Her initials were there, small and precise. Amina's hands went cold. She wrapped the mask back in its cloth and set it down as if it were a live thing. Masks were symbols, she told herself. They were part of ritual. But the way the initials had been carved, as if someone had recorded a name, made the mask feel like an assignment. She left the storeroom with the twins and the mask's image burned behind her eyes. That night a note slid under her door. It was a single line in a hand she did not know. "Do not pry. For your children's sake." The twins slept on, breathing in the same slow rhythm. Amina folded the note and put it in the pocket of her cardigan. She did not tell Noor. She did not tell anyone. She began to watch. Amina's investigation began like a teacher's curiosity. Small, methodical, patient. She had taught children to parse sentences and find subjects and verbs. She had learned to ask questions without seeming to ask. She began to listen to the hymns the Covenant sang, to the way the congregation repeated phrases and then rearranged them. She recorded the lines on her phone and played them back at night, listening for patterns. The hymns were simple on the surface: we give, we take, we balance the scale. But between the lines there were marks. A pause here, a staccato there, that suggested instruction. Noor had told her the hymns were a way to remember service. Idris had said they were a way to keep the community honest. But the more Amina listened, the more the hymns sounded like a songbook of obligations. Names, favors, and a rhythm that could be read as command. She found Lila at a cafe on the edge of town. Lila had been a member once and had left quietly, her eyes still raw. Over tea Lila told Amina about the masks. "They make you wear one," she said. "They make you chant until your voice is raw. They tell you it's for release. They tell you it will make you lighter. Then they ask for something." Lila's hands trembled as she spoke. "I signed papers I didn't understand. I gave up custody for a month and it became a year." Amina felt the word custody like a stone. She thought of the twins and the way the Covenant's members had smiled at them. She thought of the hymn sheet tucked into the bassinet. She thought of the mask with her initials. Together Amina and Lila began to decode the hymns. They wrote the lines on paper and marked the pauses. They found that certain sequences corresponded to actions. A particular cadence meant a request for property. Another meant a request for time or labor. The hymns were a language of obligation disguised as prayer. One night Amina found a hymn sheet with her twins' names written in red ink. The paper had been folded and tucked behind a hymn book at the center. Her heart hammered. The red ink looked like a mark. She took the sheet home and hid it in the pocket of her cardigan. She went to Detective Khan at the station and told him what she had found. He was a man who had been on the force for years and who had learned to listen to the small things. He took the hymn sheet and said, "We'll look into it." He did not promise much. He could not. But he filed a report and asked Amina to keep a record of any threats. The Covenant's rituals escalated. They announced a dedication, a public ceremony in the park where new members and their children were welcomed. Noor said it was a celebration of service. Idris said it was a way to bind the community. Amina felt a coldness in her chest. Dedications, Lila told her, were often followed by requests. People who had been dedicated sometimes found themselves asked to give up jobs, to sign papers, to leave town for retreats. Some returned thinner and quieter. Some did not return at all. Amina's nights became a different kind of notebook. She wrote down names, dates, and the small notations she found in the hymn sheets. She kept the red inked page folded in her pocket like a talisman. The twins slept in the next room, breathing in unison. She watched them and felt the pressure of the Covenant like a tide. One evening, while the Covenant met in the basement, Amina slipped into the storeroom and opened the locked cabinet. The masks were there, stacked like sleeping faces. She ran her fingers over the carved initials and found, beneath a layer of dust, a mask with her husband's name. Her breath stopped. She had not seen him in years. He had left with a sentence and a suitcase. She had not expected to find his name carved into wood. She took a photograph with her phone and left the storeroom with her hands shaking. The photograph felt like proof and like a blade. She did not know whether the mask meant he had joined the Covenant or whether his name had been used as a mark. She only knew that the Covenant's reach had touched her past. That night someone left a small, child-sized mask on her porch. It was carved with twin faces and tied with a thin strap. A note was attached. "Prepare. The handwriting was the same as the other notes. Amina burned the note in the sink and watched the smoke curl. She felt the twins breathing like a metronome in the next room. She began to plan. If the hymns encoded demands and the masks marked assignments, then the dedication was a hinge. She would not let the twins be given away as a symbol. She would not let the covenant turn her children into a ritual object. She would learn the code and expose it. Tariq was a journalist who wrote for the regional paper. He had a way of asking questions that made people uncomfortable because they were precise and patient. Amina met him at a cafe and slid the photograph of the mask across the table. She told him about the hymn sheets and the dedication. Tariq's eyes narrowed as he read. "If this is true," he said, "it's a story." He published an article, Masks of Silence, The Covenant's Rituals. The piece was careful, quoting witnesses and asking questions. It did not accuse, it asked. But the town reacted. Some people rallied to the Covenant's defense, saying the article was sensational. Others began to whisper about missing women and about the way the Covenant had quietly arranged adoptions and guardianships. The Covenant responded with vigils and with a public statement about tradition and privacy. Idris spoke of faith and of the need to protect the vulnerable from prying eyes. Noor spoke of service and of the good the Covenant had done. The public face was warm and composed. The private face was different. Amina received more notes. They were polite and precise. "Stop now. For your children's sake." A man offered to pay her rent if she would stop speaking to the press. A woman offered to take the twins for a weekend if she would sign a form agreeing not to pursue the Covenant. The Covenant's logic had shifted from coercion to inducement. Detective Khan obtained a warrant for a Covenant property. In a farmhouse outside town, he found a room with dozens of masks stacked on shelves, hymn sheets in neat piles, and a list of dedications and dates. Some entries were marked voluntary. Others were marked facilitated. In a locked drawer, Khan found a list of names with dates and a column labeled dedication completed. Beside some names were notes. Family consent obtained. Beside others, arranged. The discovery was explosive. The Covenant's leaders were questioned. Some members cooperated. Others clammed up. The town was split. The Covenant's supporters said the police were persecuting a faith. The critics said the Covenant had used ritual to coerce and to hide transactions that should have been public. Amina's husband's name appeared on the list. The entry was dated the year after he had left. Beside his name was a notation. Status secured. Amina felt a coldness that was not only personal. She had thought his leaving was a private wound. Now it looked like a bargain. She confronted him in a small cafe on the edge of town. He looked older, the hinge of his jaw softer. He did not deny the list. "I thought it would give me what I wanted," he said. "They promised me a place. They promised children." His voice faltered. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." "You gave them your name," Amina said. "You gave them me." He looked at her with a mixture of shame and something like relief. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he said. "I thought I was making a life." Amina left the cafe and felt the Covenant's weight like a verdict. The Covenant had not only offered help, it had created dependencies. People who had once been independent now relied on the Covenant for childcare, for work leads, for small loans. The dedication had become a mechanism for transferring obligations. Tariq's follow-up pieces dug deeper. He found records of temporary guardianships that had become permanent, of midwives who had ties to the Covenant, of social workers who had quietly recommended Covenant retreats. The town's institutions had been porous. The Covenant had not only been a congregation, it had been a network. The Covenant's leaders were arrested on charges related to coercion and fraud. The dedication list and the masks were catalogued as evidence. The public hearings were messy and raw. Some people testified about being helped. Others testified about being pressured. The Covenant's actions were laid out in courtrooms and in the press. But the social consequences did not vanish with the arrests. People who had relied on the Covenant's network found themselves adrift. Friendships fractured. Businesses suffered. The twins' faces were in the papers for a week. Then the town moved on to other scandals. Amina found herself both vindicated and exposed. The Covenant's reach had been cut, but the marks it had left on people's lives remained. One night, after a long day of testimony, Amina found a small box on her doorstep. Inside was a child-sized mask, carved with twin faces, and a note. "You will lose them if you continue." The handwriting was the same as the other notes. Amina burned the note and watched the smoke curl. She felt the twins breathing like a metronome in the next room. She had exposed the Covenant, but exposure had a cost. The social fabric had been torn. The Covenant's public presence was diminished, but the private bargains and the quiet losses were not easily repaired. She had wanted to protect her children. She had not wanted to make enemies. The Covenant's final ceremony was scheduled for a Saturday in late autumn. They called it a clearing, a ritual they said would release the town's burdens and restore balance. The park was ringed with candles and with people who had come to watch. Some came out of curiosity. Others came to support the Covenant. Amina went because she had to know. She wore a plain coat and kept the twins close. The Covenant's leaders sat at the center of the circle, masks on their laps. Idris spoke of release and of the need to let go. Noor spoke of service and of the children who would lead the town into a new balance. The twins were brought forward in their stroller, swaddled and quiet. The crowd murmured. Amina had a plan. She had copied him sheets and had the recordings she had made. She had a small projector and a speaker in the trunk of her car. If the dedication was a public performance of obligation, she would make the performance visible. She would project the coded hymns onto the whitewashed wall of the community center and play the recordings so the rhythm could be heard as instruction rather than prayer. When the dedication began, the Covenant's members rose and put on their masks. The masks were carved with initials and with patterns that echoed the twins' faces. The congregation sang. The hymns rose and folded into themselves. Amina turned on the projector and the speaker. The coded lines scrolled across the wall in black letters. The rhythm of the hymns played through the speaker, and the crowd heard the pattern. Names and requests, cadences that matched the dedication list. People in the audience shifted. Some looked confused. Others looked angry. Idris's face, visible beneath the mask, tightened. "You cannot do this," he said, voice low. Amina stepped forward. "These are not prayers," she said. "They are instructions. They are demands. They are how you have been asking for what you want." The crowd erupted. Some people shouted that she was a liar. Others demanded answers. The police, who had been monitoring the Covenant, moved in. Masks were seized. Hymn sheets were catalogued. The dedication ended in chaos. In the aftermath, the Covenant's leaders were arrested on additional charges. The masks and hymn sheets were evidence in a case that would take months to untangle. The town's institutions were forced to reckon with their complicity. Some people who had been helped by the Covenant testified in its defense. Others testified about coercion and loss. Amina's husband was questioned. He admitted he had sought status and protection from the Covenant and that he had believed the dedication would secure him a place. He had not expected the network of obligations to become a network of loss. He said he had been afraid to tell her. The trials were messy and public. The Covenant's leaders were convicted on several counts related to coercion and fraud. The dedication list and the masks were sealed as evidence. The hymn sheets were analyzed and published as part of the record. When the dust settled, the Covenant's public presence was gone. But the marks it had left on people's lives remained. Some families were broken. Some people had lost jobs or homes. The twins had become a symbol in the town's memory, a reminder of how ritual can be used to bind and to take. Amina kept one small mask, the child-sized piece someone had left on her porch the night the threats began. She placed it on the mantel above the fireplace, where the light from the window would catch the grain of the wood. She did not destroy it. She kept it as a reminder that symbols can be used to harm and to heal, depending on who holds them. She burned the hymn sheets in the fireplace one evening, watching the paper curl and blacken. The twins slept in the next room, breathing in unison. She kept a different kind of notebook now. A small book where she wrote the twins' first words, the dates of their fevers, the names of neighbors who had brought soup. She wrote in it not to tally slights or to mark debts, but to mark the ordinary, stubborn facts of life. She wrote the day the twins learned to clap, the day they fell asleep to the sound of rain, the day one of them said, with the blunt honesty of a child, "Why did they sing that way?" She did not have an answer for him that would make the past neat. She had only the truth she could live with, that she had chosen to speak, and that speaking had cost her things she could not always name. She had also chosen to stay, to hold the twins and teach them the difference between ritual and kindness, between obedience and consent. On an evening when the light was thin and the house smelled of soup and lemon, Amina sat at the kitchen table and listened to the twins breathe in the next room. She placed her hand on the table where the grain ran like a small map and felt the slow, steady pulse of her own heart. She thought of the river and the mask and the way the current had taken it. She thought of the hymns and the way a single cadence could be read as prayer or as command. She folded the small notebook closed and put it on the shelf beside the nursery books. She left the light on in the hallway and went to the twins' room. They were asleep, their faces soft and unmarked by the public story. She kissed each forehead and whispered a promise that was not a ritual but a vow. She would teach them to listen for the difference between a song that asks and a song that tells. Outside, the town moved on in its messy human way. Inside, the house held its quiet. The river kept its secrets. The mask, wherever it had gone, was carried by a current that did not judge. Amina lay awake for a long time, thinking of the small, ordinary work of keeping children safe in a world that sometimes turned belonging into a bargain. In the dark she hummed a lullaby that had no code, no carved initials, only the slow, steady cadence of a mother's voice. The sound filled the room and, for the first time in a long while, felt like enough. Did the story send chills down your spine? And from which city are you tuning in tonight? Let's meet in the comments. If you enjoyed this dark tale, you can support me with a super thanks so I can keep uncovering more gripping true crime stories for you. Thank you so much for your support. It helps me bring even more suspenseful narratives to life. I'm looking forward to your thoughts on this mystery. There's a lot more waiting for you on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. See you in the next chilling story with intrigue and respect.